Hello and welcome to this session, a complete marathon on world history. I welcome you all to this session, and we have a very important task in front of us, which is we have to cover in the next 5 to 6 hours the most important thematics of world history. Now, the way we will go about it is we will try to understand what is the syllabus. Once we understood that, we will then go into the major topics we are going to cover. And in the end, I'll try to summarize everything in the most, you can say, effective way possible. Remember that this session is most probably going to go till 10 or 11 for sure, with one break in between, so as to make sure that you have the best confidence and also best attention span in this regard. Now, let's first understand what does GS paper 1, GS paper 1 world history syllabus entail. What does it say? Good evening, good evening. Now, what it argues is the following, which is history of the world, including events from 18th century, such as Industrial Revolution, World Wars, redrawal of national boundaries, colonization, decolonization, political philosophy such as communism, capitalism, socialism, and their effects on society. Now, much like most UPSC syllabus, world history syllabus is a little bit vaguer than what we see when it comes to even modern India or be it ancient medieval art and culture. Ancient medieval art and culture prelims is even more vaguer, but modern India and art and culture syllabus is better defined than this, even along with post independence or mains. Now, based on this analysis, therefore, the following things are important and the following modules are very, very, which is first is obviously American Revolution. We have seen a question on American Revolution previously. The French Revolution, there was a question last year or rather in 2025 itself. Then we have the Industrial Revolution, which is equally important when it comes to revolutions. And the word revolution itself is directly mentioned. Thereafter, we also have the Russian Revolution. These are the revolutions which generally become important because they all have this keyword given in the syllabus itself, which is revolutions. Thereafter, further, First World War, interwar period, and World War II. These three again are areas which are very fertile for the examination. And generally, we have seen that you will have questions revolving around these 6 to 7 modules. So, the purpose of this lecture is to first is to understand what is the expectation of UPSC. It is also to revise and cover the major areas which generally hold importance in history, specifically world history. So, I hope that you understand what are the modules I'm going to cover based on their propensity of coming in the examination, based on the hit rate itself, what is expected first. Second is that if you're looking for a structured Conquer mains or mains program itself, our Conquer mains program is going to start tomorrow, or rather today at 8 p.m. with Sarmat sir. And you can also enroll into this using the code IS English. But Conquer Mains goes live. Conquer Mains goes live today. And tomorrow at 4 p.m., I will be holding the first Conquer Mains lecture of Modern India also. I'll be teaching you what are the important areas of modern India. We'll do answer writing. We will systematically cover in the next 3 days between 9th, 10th, and 11th. The modern India course will be covered. We'll do answer writing, lava answer writing, and all these other features are included in the Conquer Mains program. If you're already a student, it is already part of your Iconic or Plus program. Now, With this, let's start our discussion. Can we do that? This has to be a two-way interaction. I want you to tell me if you're understanding, if it is making sense or not. If it is making sense, is there something you want me to repeat? And you have to tell me that you're following the train of thought. These are all very complex topics, but for the purpose of the mains examination, we have to basically do it together in such a way that it is manageable. So, can we start our analysis? Yes or no? Yes, I have the chat box here. Yes, sir. Okay, perfect. Now, remember one thing, you have to give the examination 26, 27, 28, 29. This session will be relevant mostly for your preparation in the same format as we are doing it. Now, my first module is obviously American Revolution. However, if I have to cover American Revolution, if I have to cover American Revolution, then the problem is that there is certain backstory which UPSC has not taken into consideration. It says 18th century, but in order to understand the USA, Americas, and colonization, I need to go a little bit backwards into a zone where I can understand what is the context of America being found. Meaning, American Revolution is the story of America getting independence from Britain. But the problem is we have still not established when, why, and how was the New World found. And there's a certain backstory here. If we don't do that backstory, then it will be difficult for us per se to then understand American Revolution. So, what I'm going to teach you from this point forward is not part of the syllabus, but is a very important part of the backstory which is needed to understand American Revolution. So, so there are certain events in which have to be taken into consideration, and all of these events, in a way, allow us to understand why America got colonized, and then we can go into the story of American Revolution. Now, see, this is the Atlantic Ocean, right? And Europe used to call itself the Old World. Asia was known as the Orient, and they also knew about Africa because it was across the Mediterranean. So it was easy for them to locate these sectors. But for a very long time, the Europeans dare would not cross this ocean. And that was because of a certain, you can say, epistemology or knowledge system which existed, which was controlled by the church, which thought that the earth was flat. The idea was that if you go too much into the deep seas and into the deep ocean, you will fall off the earth and its edge. Now, the question is, what changed and how was, from the perspective of the New World, discovered and found? From the perspective of Europe, how was the New World found and why was the New World found? Because this is the New World according to it. But the question is, how and why? And this takes us to the point where we have to understand about certain events. Those events start from the following understanding. See, the Vikings knew of the New World, which is Americas. There were very, you can say, advanced civilizations such as the Aztecs, Incas, Mayans. Multiple such civilizations were there across the Atlantic Ocean. But the problem per se was that the Europeans started to document this knowledge, but this knowledge was in a way documented in Greek and Roman knowledge. When the Roman Catholic Church or the Catholic Church or the church itself started to create what is called as scholasticism, its own education model, they started to bury all of these under the rugs. And what was pushed through was a God centric view of the earth. And the idea that the earth was a flat earth with a spherical dome. And therefore, what led to the church allowing this knowledge to come through, and what allowed the, you can say, the resurrection of the knowledge which was known previously about the new world coming back, or even the idea that the earth was not flat. The Greeks knew that, the Romans knew that. How did the Europeans start to understand that the earth was not flat, and how did it change? This is where you have to understand about a certain moment in European history. It's called as Renaissance. Again, I'm going into the backstory to come till American Revolution. Now, Renaissance is a cultural movement. It's a cultural movement which basically started in the Italian peninsula. And Renaissance basically was trying to revive or relive the Greek knowledge. Now, the reason why Renaissance was possible was because the kings had become extremely frustrated by the church control over them. And over a period of time, they became extremely frustrated by it. And that is where absolutist monarchy started to rise across Europe. The church power was taken away from the king itself. King became more and more independent. And that in turn led to the revivalism of Greek knowledge. And that is basically the concept of Renaissance. Now, Renaissance had two very specific impacts on human history. The first one being of humanism, and the second one is called as individualism. What humanism and individualism started to argue was that humans are important, their agency is important, their actions have an important aspect on us, and God is not everything. Similarly, the individual, man over God, became more and more important. And because of that, what came out as a new concept in Europe is the humanities and the concept of humanistic subjects. For example, history, sociology, anthropology, political science, all are humanities. The idea that we want to study the history of the humans, the society of the humans, the culture of humans, the political setup of the humans. And this, therefore, challenged scholasticism. And when it challenged scholasticism, what happens is that they basically now are questioning the relationship of God with man, and how powerful is this theological understanding. This in turn led to new type of education to rise and allowed for some space to be opened for revivalism of Greek knowledge. Greeks knew that the earth was not flat per se, and Renaissance creates the cultural environment in which the church's authority over education was eroded enough. Now, the Renaissance was followed by a very important moment and event in European history, which is called as Reformation. Now, this was the biggest blow to the European church, to the church per se, to the Pope. And the Reformation was a coup from within. The church, its clergy were very, very corrupt. Because of their corruption, there was a lot of resentment which was rising in the rank and file and the lower levels of the church. One such individual, Martin Luther, now became extremely, extremely frustrated by the way the church was selling what are called a sale of indulgences. Sins could be written off by sale of indulgences. You can buy the benefaction of God via money. And this is where he will then start what is called as the Lutheran religion, or what is called as the Protestant version of Christianity. And the Roman Catholic Church will then become two parts: Catholics, Protestants. Now, what happens is, whilst the Catholics were more and more or less connected to scholasticism, Protestant churches such as the Lutherans, Calvin, Anglicanists across Europe, there are multiple renditions of Reformation too, and they become humanistic. And because of the rise of humanism and because of Renaissance and Reformation, what happens is finally there is enough space for people to talk about sciences. And this leads to what is called as the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution starts with Galileo, then Kepler, then comes Newton, who says that there are three natural laws, not God given laws. And then comes Harvey and the rise of botany, the rise of human studies, the rise of anatomy. All this allows for scientific knowledge to come through to Europe. And this, in turn, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, create the context for modern sciences. And also, with the rise of modern sciences, we have certain new technologies developing, which is the magnetic compass, the telescope, but also the magnetic needle. One which tells you direction, the other one which tells you which latitude you are in, and the next one which gives you a bird's eye view of something which is far away. All part of the scientific and modern sciences understand. Now, together, if I add all of these things, Renaissance plus Reformation plus scientific revolution plus modern sciences, and we finally get the age of discovery. Finally, get men who are ready to sail into the Atlantic Ocean. And this will lead to a whole flurry of men trying to cross the Atlantic. Though their destination was Indian subcontinent, because of the Ottomans rising, they were looking for an alternative route to India. A person called Columbus will be the first to cross over into West Indies in 1492, which is considered to be a watershed in world history because the new world is found. But at the same point of time, after him, there will be multiple such personalities such as Columbus, Amerigo Vespucci, Cabot, and then Magellan is very, very important because Magellan will prove that the earth is not flat, but the earth is a circular, you can say basically a circle or at least a geoid. And therefore, finally it has been established that there's something across the Atlantic, but at the same point of time, there is this idea of logic, modern sciences, rationality, which will start to spread across this sector. And this will also lead to Diaz coming to India and thereafter Vasco da Gama coming to India in 1498, therefore opening the world of what is called as colonialism. Now, you tell me one thing. Does this make sense? This train of thought of how the Europeans, specifically Henry the Navigator, how these men developed the courage to cross the Atlantic. Are we clear about this? First things first. Yes, sir. Okay. Now that we've established that there is this North America, South Americas, and there is a new age. The impulse to cross the Atlantic, the impulse to cross the Atlantic was based on three G's: gold, glory, God, which is gold for the resources which are available in the American sector, glory for the king, and the spread of Catholic Christianity in this sector. That is why most of Latin America is actually Catholic Christian because the same church which used to say that the earth was flat now allows for or even gives a bull to Henry the Navigator that you go and fund these men who can go across and spread Christianity. But now our story per se does not actually revolve around South America or North America. World history, as it has to be understood for the examination, starts with a very important discovery, and that discovery is of what is called the British colonies. See, most of America, in the north, there were the French, here where there were the Spanish, and most of Americas, most of South America, other than this sector, Portuguese, this was Spanish, again, this was Spanish. Only this sector, as you see here, this sector, this sector was the only one which was basically open to the British to colonize. And this is where our story starts, which is the establishment of the original 9 and then 13 colonies. All of these colonies, what is specific to them is these are mostly private colonies. Britain is the country of origin. Most of them were actually looking for some form of safe haven because they were facing religious persecution. If not, they were looking for economic opportunity. And much like India, initially the British crown was extremely reluctant to actually come to the Northern American sector or even invest in this sector. So these were mostly private merchants who had funded these voyages, and at the same point of time, all of this sector, all of this sector was actually, some of them were Britishers, some of them were Irishmen, some of them were Scottish, some of them were even Germans, French. What is specific to this sector is most of them are Protestants. Most of them are Protestants. Now, being Protestant, what happens is that the British colonies have a very different type of ethics, right? But the biggest issue which the Britishers have and most of these colonies have is this is not a very fertile sector. Unlike Brazil, unlike Argentina, unlike most of Latin America, even towards the Spanish Americas at this point of time, that was fertile territory, has a lot of gold and silver. But unfortunately, this whole sector is extremely either very, very cold, extreme weathers, and extremely unviable when it comes to economic value. Because what they can grow is corn, which was taught to them by the Red Indians itself. That is why Thanksgiving. But see, south of Virginia, the temperature is such that you can actually grow a little bit of tropical crops. But north of Virginia, it is very cold. So the biggest issue which the British have is that they have a colony. They have a colony in Americas, but it is purely of no economic value. And this is where our story starts. What we have said is the context. The context is of age of discovery. The context is of age of exploration. The context is of age of colonization. The idea that the world as of right now was being colonized through imperialistic notions of the Europeans. So, in very simple terms, our context is set. America has been colonized by the British, but the problem lies in how do they make it of any economic value. And this is where our story for the American Revolution starts. American Revolution starts. Can I enter our first major discussion, which is American Revolution? Yes or no? Yes, sir. Okay, perfect. Now, let's start our first module, which is looking at your comments. Then go ahead. Okay, great. Now, See, the American Revolution has two parts. First is how did the attitude change? At the same point of time, the second part is why did the attitude? Meaning, these are the two parts on which you can get questions. How and why? In most cases, the course of the American Revolution is not talked about, but why and how is asked in mains exam. Now, the first issue which the British have is that though they have America as a colony, it has no economic value. Therefore, they have to find a way to make it of any value per se as a colony. Because colonies are for exploitation. And therefore, if they have to exploit the North American sector, they have to first make it a part of the larger world trade. And this is where the English make the economic value of the Americas contingent on how it responds to or is integrated into what is called as the world triangular trade or quadrilateral trade. See, you have England as the mother country, you have Americas. Now, England cannot produce tropical crops, it cannot produce, for example, cotton, it cannot produce rubber, it cannot produce tobacco. This can be produced in south of Virginia in the Americas. But at the same point of time, England can invest in America, but the Americans have a very major issue. That issue is labor versus land. Land is an abundant resource in America, but labor isn't. And when labor isn't, they need to bring in labor from somewhere. And this leads to the creation of what is called as the triangular trade between Africa, England, and America, which is called slave trade. So the English used to go to Africa with guns, manufactured goods, and they used to give it to the tribes who don't have a pan African understanding. They have a tribal understanding. So the Zulus would be ready to sell, for example, any other tribe which was caught as a prisoner of war. And this led to the blacks being sold as property to the Portuguese, to the French, to the English, to the Spanish. And this is called as black slavery or what is called as chattel slavery. Slavery had existed across the world in different forms, be it in the form of the Greco-Roman one, be it Dasa-Dasi tradition of India, but never had it existed in the form of property-based slavery, the most brutalist of all. And this is where the Middle Passage became the most known and also the most brutal form of people's transportation in the form of property. And once they were brought into America, they were then made a part of the cotton plantation system. Be it rubber, be it copper, or be it cotton, be it tobacco, or be it even rice, all being produced in America and then transported to England. This made the American colonies viable. The whole of this coast, as you can see, is now viable because of the slave trade which exists here. Slaves moving towards America, goods moving towards England, and manufactured goods and guns going to Africa. If you add India as a node, it then becomes quadrilateral. So we have a triangular trade between America, England, and Africa. And India, if added to the story, makes it even more complete. And therefore, this is how America, which was not resource rich, was made of any economic value to the English in the larger scheme of things. India was much more valuable and it had more viability as a colony. America now has some form of economic stability, and the Americans were happy. The attitude of an American at this point of time is that he's not an American, he's rather a British American. British American means that he keeps his British identity first and his American identity second. And in that case, what happens is being called an American is not something which they're actually leading to their identity formation, or being called an American is not very common. The British American. Now, a very important question which arises out of this whole scenario is how does how does England generate any revenue? Because at the end of the day, revenue is what the English seek in this story. As a colony, it is getting a lot of commodities, but revenue is something, money is something which the English are seeking. And that is based on something called the Navigation Acts of 1650, 51, and 1660. These three Navigation Acts basically establish the structure in which the English can now generate some form of revenue. Now, the first Navigation Act said any ship which is moving from the American sector to the English sector to the rest of the world, if the ship is plying between any of these sectors, the ship should be registered and built in England, which means that what the English first protected was the shipbuilding industry in England itself. Thereafter, once they had protected their shipbuilding industry, the next two navigation acts were even more interesting, which is that when Americans are trading with the world, they cannot trade directly. If, for example, Americans want to sell cotton to the French, they first have to take that cotton to England, where they will pay import duty, then they will pay export duty, and then sell it to the French. Similarly, if the French want to sell wine to the Americans, they will first have to come here and give import duty at an English port, then export duty at an English port, and then take that wine to Americas. There was a way to circumvent this also, because most of the West Indies was not just under the British but also the French and the Spanish and the Portuguese. It was easy to smuggle, but the idea was revenue was generated through import and export duty. There was no direct relationship between the rest of the world and America. Americans were accepting this model and were happy because at least they were getting some form of trade via the concept of this triangular trade, and nobody objected to this in the 17th century per se. But let's map their attitude here. If I look at the 1700s, at the eve of 1700 itself, there is two types of attitudes here. What is the American attitude and what is the British attitude, which is metropole and colony. Now, in the colonies, they are happy to be part of the larger trade. They are at the same point of time happy that they're part of an economically viable system, and whatever employment or income which is coming to them because of the British. And therefore, they are very, very glad of that. They don't mind being called a British American. Yes, they are being exploited by the mother country, but they don't mind that, because that brings them employment and some form of economic viability in the larger system. If you look at the British also have a very interesting perspective here. See, the revenue generated by the American sector is very low if compared to India. However, they don't mind the revenue being low because their investment into the American sector is very, very low. So, because they have invested very low amounts in the American sector, just connecting them through trade, in the same way, they are not really that, you can say, picky with regards to how much revenue is coming. So, neither do the Americans care the British are exploiting them, but neither do the British care if a lot of revenue is generated on. So as of 1700s, it's a jolly good picture. Everybody loves each other. Everybody's together. But something will change and some change has to come through. Again, all of this is built up to what is called the American Revolution. Now, how does change come about? And the answer to that question comes from the new ideas which start to flow into America, the American attitude, and also an very important event which happens in the world at this point in time. The first is American attitudinal shift. One of the reasons for that is in 18th century, Enlightenment ideas started to pour into America. Enlightenment ideas would mean Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu, all talking about what is called as civil liberties, which is right to property, right to freedom of speech, right to liberty, the concept of social contract. That a country has or the people of a country have a social contract with their monarch or with their state, which gives them protection. And with these ideas of liberty, what is called as freedom, the concept of social contract, state formation, when all of these things start to pour into this sector, they start to also develop what is called as the American ethic. An ethic is based on self assurance that I can do it, which is the concept of liberty, reason being very important. Church is not good. The idea that religion is not very, very important. And this is where there will be a lot of new intellectual churn which will happen across the American sector. This is considered to be the first cause of the American Revolution because American Revolution has now, in a way, started in the minds of the Americans. How? Because they have started to now look for virtues which were only available in Europe in a non colonized sector. But now they're developing this idea that liberty, fraternity, all of these things, representation matters. Now, the event which literally changes this relationship in one, you can say, snap is called the 7 Years' War. 7 Years' War, if you remember, is something which we discuss in modern India also. 7 Years' War is the second episode of the Austrian War of Succession. If you remember, Maria Theresa and Frederick were fighting who will become the ruler of the Austrian Hungarian Empire. And therefore, there was a fight between Maria Theresa and Frederick. England and France were on two sides at that point of time, whilst the Austrian War of Succession did not spill over into the American sector. But when this issue again rises, this time the Austrian War of Succession spreads the Americas also in the form of 7 Years' War. Now, 7 Years' War is a major crisis for the English. They don't have to per se protect India that much. Though the third Carnatic War is happening, the first Carnatic War had already happened because of Austrian War of Succession. Americas is a much vaster sector, and the French, the Spanish are next to each other along with the English. And therefore, this was a bigger threat to the American colony. So a lot of troops and a lot of money was invested from the part of the English towards America, and they all wanted to protect each other's colony. So now there is a very big investment which is made by England in order to protect America. That is because of the 7 Years' War, which is the trigger here. 7 Years' War, when it will conclude in 1763, had now created a very big national debt in England because they had protected the Americas. And though French and Britain, or rather the British and the French, will rather exchange a lot of territories, the problem was that the British expenditure into protecting America was now exponentially higher than any investment made previously. And this is where we see a new shift in the British attitude. Previously, the British had not invested too much into the American sector, so therefore they did not care how much came out of that sector. But now, because the British had invested quite a lot into the American sector, they want their money back. They want the Americans to fund the national debt, which had been created because of the defense of America. So, therefore, at the moment of 7 Years' War, 7 Years' War, before 7 Years' War, British don't care about the revenue because the investment is very low. Investment is very low. But at the same point of time, the Americans were equally happy to be called as British American. And when they are called as British Americans, they were also very happy to be part of the larger system. However, what happens is when the 7 Years' War happens, 7 Years' War now changes the attitude. As it is, the American had now started to develop his own identity, which is of an American, not of a British American. The word British is now dropped. He's now an American per se, and he fought in the war as an America. The 13 colonies came together in the process of fighting in the war. At the same point of time, the British want more, they want to extract more. At the same point of time, they want to treat America as a proper colony. The Americans don't want to be treated as a colony. So, the second factor, other than the ideological shift, the second factor in the story is 7 Years' War. If they ask you a question on what were the factors which led to, or what are the causes of the American War of Revolution, or American War of Independence, or American Revolution itself, then we have two factors now in place. Anybody has any issue in these two? Should not be very difficult. This is the most cumbersome per se, but not very difficult after this point. Are we clear about what is the attitudinal idea here? So, what we've listed till this point is first, change in American attitude. That is because of enlightenment. The second we've discussed is change in British attitude. And that is because of 7 Years' War. And the third is 7 Years' War. That is 7 Years' War, which is these three factors now create the context for a certain course, which is also the cause. A course which is also a cause. Got it, everybody? Okay, very good. Now, what is the American Revolution? See, the first major change or first change which the British bring in is called the writ of assistance. Is a writ of assistance. The writ of assistance was to check smuggling. That if there's any form of smuggling which is happening, they would using the writ of assistance, which is basically a warrant, check the smuggling person, right? From the writ of assistance, they move towards amending an act called the Molasses Act. Molasses Act actually was based on the concept of duties on any molasses. Molasses is basically what is called as good jaggery. Any molasses which was not British. Basically, if you're buying molasses from the Spanish or the Portuguese, then there would be a duty which would be levied. A duty. Now, at the same point of time, the British were able to find, you can say, new ways of taking out taxes, doing something about the taxes, but they needed a more concrete, concrete, you can say, emphasis, concrete understanding to get more. And this will lead them to the third major, or rather, fourth major cause of the American Revolution to happen, which is called as the Stamp Act. Now, before this point, before this point, all taxes were levied on merchants. And when they were levied on merchants, in most cases, the people were not affected. Prices may have gone up and down, but the people were not affected per se. But Stamp Act is basically a stamped duty on every document which is produced by the government at the same point of time by the church, and this impacts everyone. This impacts everyone. Now, when the Stamp Act is brought in and it impacts everybody, that in turn leads us to this understanding that now people started to question this tax because of its universality. And this is where the Americans started to question, how are you taxing us when you don't represent us? And this is where the slogan came, no taxation without representation. What do you mean by no taxation without representation? In very simple ways, they said that because there is no American sitting in the British Parliament at this point of time, therefore, you don't have a representative from us. When you don't have any representative, then you don't have it is still an indirect tax. It had a direct impact on everybody. So the idea was no taxation without representation. And this will make the Americans politically charged. Also, the Sons of Liberty. Sons of Liberty, this organization will be formed in order to basically fight against the British. And there is protest, boycott. The political consciousness of the American was now in context. And therefore, the British had not expected something. The British had thought that they will take out more in the form of Stamp Act. But as soon as Stamp Act comes through, there's a political outpour, no taxation without representation, Sons of Liberty, boycott. And the British had no choice but to de escalate. So now this whole story is going to be a story of escalation and de escalation. Stamp Act is an escalating point where people are now on the streets saying that you cannot tax us. So they de-escalate and they repeal the Stamp Act and bring in what is called as, this was in 1765. In 1767, they will bring in what is called as the townshend duties. The idea was, through the townshend duties, they will remove the Stamp Act, but the damage was already done. But through these townshend duties, they are going to now check on what is called as smuggling. So two regiments were placed in a place, Boston. Now, in Boston, the revolutionary spirit was much higher. The event of Townshend duty leads to another escalation. Some adolescent boys, some men went and started to tease the what we call as regiments which were placed, some soldiers who were actually just placed next to this, you can say, major town square. They started to throw what is called as snowballs on them, and in retaliation to this provocation by the people, the British regiment, or the British, you can say, soldiers shot on the people, and rather they basically did an open firing, and 5 to 6 people died. And this is called as the Boston Massacre. More people die in India from a car crash, but the Boston Massacre is a point where it is believed that the British had now made this conflict bloody because now there was an act where the British had killed certain Americans. So there is now even more anger in the Boston sector, and the British would have to then remove these regiments. And the whole point was that they had just teased them through the form of snowballs. This is an artistic rendition of that. So Boston Massacre is again a high point of this story. So therefore, once the Boston Massacre is a point of contention between the British and the Americans, these two regiments are removed and they de-escalate. De-escalate. There is a removal of all the men, and the British don't want to make this more complicated than it is. Thereafter, there is going to be a new escalation which is going, as one of you already pointed out. It is called the Tea Act. Called the Tea Act. Tea Act. Now, this was our fourth cause. This is our fifth cause. This is the sixth cause. I'm basically listing you the causes also. See, Tea Act was to save the East India Company. As we already know that Clive had overestimated the revenue coming out of Bengal. East India Company was in a crisis in India because of the fact that the Clivean fiscal bubble had basically burst in England. The East India Company stock price fell like anything. So the British now gave the East India Company a right to import tea tax free. Now, this was considered to be a major point of contention because this would not allow anybody other than the British to trade in America, basically with such a margin which the East India Company had. East India Company had to pay no taxes, but the merchants had to. And therefore, in that case, what happens is the Tea Act was considered to be a major point of escalation as equal to the Stamp Act. Now, in most cases, what happened was when the East India Company ships came through into a certain harbor of America, the people did not allow them to enter. However, in Boston, the governor insisted on Hutchinson insisted on the ship to be docked into America or into Boston. This is where the Sons of Liberty are now going to enter this ship and throw the tea into the Boston harbor, which is called as another major point of contention, which is called Boston Tea Party. Boston Tea Party. This is the highest point in this story because by throwing the East India Company tea into the harbor itself, they now made it a point that they will defy anything which the Britishers and the East India Company would do in America. And therefore, with the Boston Tea Party, British now said enough, enough. Lord North and George III now said enough is enough. We can't let this happen. This is now going above and beyond. And that is why when the Boston Tea Party happened, the whole story was that there was no de escalation after this, only escalation in the form of the intolerable acts or called the coercive acts. This was the eighth and the most important. This is the British disciplining the Americans. And the intolerable acts, therefore, now basically meant that first 10,000 pound worth of tea which had been thrown had to be paid by the Bostoners. The harbor of Boston will be closed till they don't pay that. Military will be now stationed and housed by the people. And the political structure was changed in such a way that the governor was now not answerable to the people. In addition to this, the Quebec Act was brought in. And when the Quebec Act is brought in, and the timeline of all of this is 1773, 1773, Quebec Act allowed the Catholic Church to now preach in Canada, which was a British protectorate. And this was considered to be a problem with regards to the religious freedom of the people. And when that happened, now the Britishers had, in a way, that we will not de escalate. And the Americans also said that we will not de escalate. And in reply to the Quebec Act and the Intolerable Act, in 1774, what is called as the First Continental Congress is established. And we believe that the American Revolution had now run its course. Had now run its course. In the First Continental Congress on 5th September 1774, there were still two factions who one wanted to stay with the English, one which said they did not want to be with the English. But the First Continental Congress now is where the Americans, 13 colonies, have come together. Still, a lot of contemplation will be going on in the background. But between 1774 and 1776, the relationship of the Americans and the Britishers will become even more complicated. There will be multiple armed skirmishes. In the Second Continental Congress, in 1776, they will establish what is called as the Continental Army, which is then going to protect with George Washington and the Commander in Chief, which is going to then protect the American colonies. And in 1776, after all forms of negotiations broke down, the Declaration of Independence came on 4th of July, 1776, written by Thomas Jefferson, and America declared freedom. They will fight between 1776 to 1783, and in 1783, finally, America will become a the first republic in this world. This is basically the American Revolution. Now, in American Revolution, if we talk about the causes, first, Enlightenment, second, 7 Years' War, third, Stamp Act, fourth, Boston Massacre, fifth, Boston Tea Party, sixth, Intolerable Acts, and seventh, Continental Congress. Together, if you can list any of this in the examination, you are sorted. And significance obviously is first republic of the world, ideas of liberty, freedom, taxation without representation, also inspired the French Revolution. But are we clear about this first? Then I move to the French Revolution. Everybody, come on. Yes, sir. No, sir. Yes. Okay. Now, We take a break after we complete French Revolution. The idea is to keep you fresh throughout this period. Boston Massacre is only when the regiments placed under Townshend duties kill certain people in Boston over a certain heated conversation and skirmish. Okay, now when we talk about the French Revolution, again, there are three to four things here: cause, course, significance. Now, in most cases, cause is something which is asked in the examination. Significance is something which is asked in the examination. But course is so long, it is very difficult to actually understand, explain, or go ahead in 150 to 50. In order to understand France, one of the second largest country in Europe at this point of time, American Civil War is not important for GS. For optional, yes, but for GS, not important. Now, when we talk about the French Revolution has you can say rippling effect across the world, and therefore the causes have to be understood. Now, when we talk about the French Revolution, let's talk about the causes first. Can you explain Tea Party? Simple, straightforward. Tea Act says that tea will be brought in by East India Company without any duty. They don't like that. They go up the ship which was made to dock against the wishes of the people. They throw the tea into the Boston Harbor as a form of protest, and that is called the Boston Tea Party. Now, when we talk about the causes, the first cause is called the ancient regime. This is the French spelling of this ancient regime or ancient regime, which is the way their society was divided into three estates called the three estate model. What is the three estate model? The first estate is the clergy, which is nobody else but the church's bureaucracy. The second estate is the nobility, which is the people who are the relatives of the king, or you can buy into nobility. And the third estate is basically called the commoners or the common people. Now, the first estate does not pay any taxes, owns close to 10% of all the land in France. Similarly, the second estate is again 1 to 2% of the society, but 10 to 20% of the land pays no taxes. Both of them pay no taxes. And the 98% of the people are the third estate, and they all are taxed beyond exception, be it artisans, be it farmers, be it the bourgeoisie. Bourgeoisie word is used for commercial classes. Now, third estate was taxed beyond exception. There were illegal taxes. There was tithe, which was a tax which was paid given to the church. There were too much taxation per se. There is administrative issues also. The administrative issues is that there is a lot of corruption, no judicial setup per se. Thereafter, there is one bigger issue in France at this point in time, which is the agrarian, you can say, or agriculture failing year after year. And that is leading to what is called as bread riots. Bread riots is people don't have food to eat, so they are rioting against that. And there was a failure of the crop multiple years, specifically between the 1750 to 1780s period, a lot of crop failure. There is also no representative institution. This is where even more problematic. See, the Louis are an absolutist monarchy. Louis the 13th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. The person who is in context is here 15th and 16th. Louis the 15th and 16th don't allow people to have any say. Crop failure because of no investment into agriculture, drought situations. There is a lot of, you can say, need for fertilizers. There are multiple things which is pushed through. There is nothing being pushed. The peasants are exploited beyond exception. And no representative institution means there's something called the estate general. When the estate general is in place, it has all three estates represented. But the problem with the estate general is each estate has one vote. 1 plus 1 plus 1. Total number of votes is 3. So what used to happen was every time the first and the second estate used to come together, and the third estate was always made to pay more and more tax. The state is extremely corrupt, and they were so oblivious of the people that when Louis XVI's wife was looking out the window, Marie Antoinette, she saw the people rioting on the streets, and they were saying, "Why are the people rioting on the streets?" So the servant said to Marie Antoinette that they're rioting because of food. They have no bread to eat, and she was so oblivious of everything that she will say that if they don't have food to eat or they have no bread to eat, why don't they eat cake? Not understanding that she does not even understand that cake is also made out of bread only. So the idea was their system is extremely corrupt. People are in a lot of anger, and there's a lot of anguish which is there in the people. And over and above that, the enlightenment will start to also spread across this sector because of Voltaire, Rousseau, Diderot, Montesquieu, Locke, now talking about again civil liberty. The same things which were being talked about in America, reaching America, was spreading across France. Because of this ideological shift, because of this ideological shift, where people were now advocating for constitutional form of government, the separation of power, separation of church and state, the idea that it's a social contract between people, men are born free but are in chains everywhere else, a new intellectual environment emerged. And because of that, along with Louis the 16th, 15th and 16th involved in the Austrian War of Succession, which was not their war, the 7 Years' War, which was again not their war, and what they were even more, you can say, dumber in doing is that they were also funding the American War of Independence. The Americans were getting money from the French so as to fight the British. And this is where all of these things come together. And when the American War of Independence ends, what happens is that the finance minister of Louis XVI will say to Louis XVI that we were at a surplus of 110 million francs before the war. Now we are in a deficit of 110 million. And this will then induce a whole chain of events, which is called the French Revolution. Now, before we go into it, you have to understand the causes here again, because this is what is something again UPSC can ask, has asked, and will ask. That is the ancient regime or the social structure. Why the French gave money to the Americans? Because they thought by the Americans, when they will become independent, that will weaken the British and in turn allow the French to be better placed vis-a-vis the British. But that will not happen. Second is administrative reasons. Then there is economic causes, which would be agrarian, agrarian distress, the concept of what is called as famines, bread riots, over taxation. Fourth, then it will be the concept of church based exploitation. Then it will be enlightenment. Then it will be the concept of what is called as immediate causes. And immediate causes will be economic crisis after American Revolution, which is going to manifest itself in 1780s. All of these factors come together to create an understanding. Now, when we talk about course, please understand one thing. It is very difficult to make a question on course because it is a very long story. So I will give you one page mind map for the course, I hope that would be enough for you to understand. Can we do that? The whole course of the French Revolution. Can we discuss this? In one slide, I want to push through everything so that we can talk about Napoleon, then take a break and go to the American Revolution, rather the Industrial Revolution, and so on and henceforth. Yes, sir? Okay. Now, see, the French Revolution starts in 1789. It starts when, in order to tax the French people more, the estate general is called after 200 years. And the idea was to make them pay for the fiscal crisis which had been created because of American Revolution. But when they go and meet Louis XVI, they say that we want one more vote so that we can balance the first and second estate. He does not do that. And the people then realize that they are going to be made a fool out of. But because they were now influenced by the what is called as Enlightenment ideas, they will create what is called as the National Assembly via the concept of what is called as tennis court oath. Tennis court oath will be taken that we will now make a constitution of France, which is going to be democratic, and we will not leave this tennis court until unless we don't make that constitution. National Assembly was writing a constitution. Louis XVI will ask his men to go and disperse it. That will in turn lead to what is called as the storming of the Bastille, that is called Bastille Day. And in turn, the National Guard will be created, which will then protect the National Assembly of the, the French. Now, writing a constitution does not solve systemic issues in France. So, in August of 1789, they will introduce certain decrees which will lead to the people to think that there is hope in this society, and that is called the Declaration of Rights of Man and Citizen. Citizen active who pays taxes, and only of man. This is considered to be the mini constitution of every constitution which is available on earth today, because most of the principles of the Declaration of Right of Man and Citizen is there enshrined in even our constitution in that. And this is where the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen will then become the base for what is called as the 1791 Constitution, the first constitution which they will write. The 1791 Constitution was a constitutional monarchy, constitution, and they wanted the National Assembly will then transform into something called the Legislative Assembly. But there was a lot of contemplation within the Legislative Assembly that should they go for a republic, because they're already represented a republic in the world by this point in time, which is America. And that is why the National Assembly will get divided into two parts: Jacobians, who wanted a republic, and Girondinists, who basically wanted to stay with the constitutional monarchy. But because Louis XVI had felt threatened by this action, he will ask his Austrian and Prussian counterparts to attack France, and this in turn will lead to the start of what is called as the Revolutionary Wars. Revolutionary Wars, which happens between 1792 to 1802. In this Revolutionary Wars, even Napoleon will go and fight, and the idea was very simple, that the people wanted to protect the French Revolution. Now, whilst all of this is happening, people were not able to understand that how Louis the 16th himself had actually asked Austrian and Prussian king to basically attack France. Meanwhile, Louis the 16th himself will try to leave France, and he will be caught twice. And this in turn will lead to the storming of the Tuileries. And Tuileries was basically his summer palace. At the storming of Tuileries, it is also found that Louis XVI had asked the Austrian and Prussian king to attack, and the Jacobians will now run rampage. And by 1793, they had killed the king and now had written a new constitution, the 1793 constitution, which was going to be a republican constitution. So the Jacobians take over, and the legislative assembly is now called as the National Convention. When the National Convention comes into context, this National Convention should have executed the 1793 Constitution. But rather than doing that, what happens is the National Convention is, in a way, taken over by a person called Max Millen Robespierre, and he will now have between 1793, 1794, 1794. This period of 1 year was called as the Reign of Terror. The Reign of Terror. And because of the Reign of Terror, now the whole French Revolution will be derailed, because Maximilien Robespierre, in the name of removing the loyalists, he's going to kill even philosophers. And Robespierre had now derailed the French Revolution. The French Revolution had now become a machine to only produce what is called as constitutions, but not implement them. Now, this will lead to what is called as the Thermidorian reaction. Thermidorian reaction. Thermidor was the month of July in the new, you can say, calendar which Robespierre had brought through. In the Thermidorian reaction, what is going to happen is that finally Robespierre will be guillotined by the same things, or for the same things for which he was guillotining others, killing others. Robespierre had now gone above and beyond to destroy the whole French Revolution. And the Thermidorian reaction, his power is curtailed, he's killed. And now they will write their third constitution, which is the Constitution of 1795, which is also called as the Directory Constitution. Now, in this Directory Constitution, things will become bicameralism. Bicameralism means two houses, and thereafter there will be five directors who will basically control everything. Lovely. That is why I told you that is why the UPSC cannot ask a question on this course. It's a very complicated event. Then between 1797 and 1799, the same five directors now started to conspire to capture power. And this is where in 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte is going to capture power, and he is going to then write the fourth constitution, which is called the Consulate Constitution, in which there were three houses and three consuls who basically together were going to. But what is interesting is, once Napoleon will come into context, he will first bring in Concordat, which is basically an agreement between the Pope and him, that he will appoint all the clergies and all the claims of the church will be gone. But France will then become a Catholic country. He will bring in educational reform. He will bring in the codes. He will make everything perfectly fine. Napoleon was stabilizing the country. And he will even stop the same war which had started in 1803. But the problem is, he will then in 1802 proclaim himself as consul for life, and in 1804 start the Napoleonic Wars, where he will proclaim himself as emperor. And now the French Revolution had been turned on its head, and now Napoleon will start to fight with the world. Between 1804 to 1815, he will fight. In 1815, in the Battle of Waterloo, he will then be in a way defeated by the alliance of Britain, Austria, Spain, and other powers. And finally, the Napoleonic Wars will be over and the concert of Eurosystem, the Metternich Order, will come into context. What is interesting is in 1815, monarchy was brought back to France and Louis the 18th was now back. And this is where we believe that the whole French Revolution was nothing but a comical event reached back to its own point. It started with the monarchy of Louis the 16th, then it went from this to National Assembly to one constitution to another constitution, the other constitution, thereafter to the sixth event, then to the emperor, and then back to Louis the 18th. This is basically the whole story of the French Revolution. When we do it in class as part of world history in elevated batch itself, we will do it in much more detail, and I'll do it in 3.5 hours only the French Revolution. But if you are revising with me and if you need an understanding of the French Revolution, this should suffice. You should be able to understand how what happens between 1789 to 1815 and the idea of how they start with Louis the 16th, end up with Louis the 18th, and basically the whole world, how again monarchy came because the concert of Europe, what is called as the Congress of Paris, basically restored monarchy into France. The victors restored monarchy into France, and the Metternich order basically comes into context. That is why I told you course of the French Revolution is very difficult. Basically, you have multiple dates which are very difficult to summarize as it is: 1789, 1791, 1793, 1793, 1795, 1797, 1799, 1802, 1806, 1815, and they are basically back to the same point. They start with French Revolution, constitutional monarchy, republic, directory, consulate, rather coup, consulate, the consul for life, emperor, Waterloo, and what is called as monarchical Bourbon restoration, as it is called. So basically, it's a whole chain which happens like this. This is very difficult to write in 150, 250 words. I hope you get that point. Very difficult to establish something like this in 150 to 250 words because there's too much detail here. Now, for us, the significance of the French Revolution matters more. But to show you the significance, you should understand what does the Declaration of Right of Man and Citizen actually say. For example, the Declaration of Right of Man and Citizen talked about individual security, right to freedom, right to equality, right to property, expression of common will, everybody is equal before the law. It allows you or allows the government not to arrest or does disallows the government to unlawfully arrest anybody. Thereafter, freedom of speech, press, the idea of sovereignty vested in the parliament. All people are basically having the same right to acquire governmental ranks. Private property is important right itself. All men can diffuse any form of religious practice. Freedom lies in the activity that do not harm others. All officers are accountable to the public. So these are very important concepts which the Declaration of Right of Man and Citizen comes to. And I have already given you this whole course, which is from storming of Tuileries to the Jacobians creating National Convention to Louis XVI dying in 1793 to the Reign of Terror where Maximilian Robespierre just turns everything on its head to the Thermidorian reaction to the Directory Constitution to him capturing power and Napoleon basically introducing what is called as the consulate rule. Napoleonic era was obviously based on multiple factors, but the most important was the constitution, his codes, which forever changed the way he basically uh, took care of France itself. But for us, what is important is how he became a emperor and started what is called as the Napoleonic Wars, which had an impact on India also. From Trafalgar to basically Holy Roman Empire was destroyed by him properly. England he was not able to because of the continental system, and in the end, he will be defeated at Waterloo in 1815, and the Congress of what is called as Vienna will then establish the Bourbon monarchy back in France, and the concert of Europe will be established under a Austrian called Metternich. This is basically the story. But again, significance for us matters more than anything. Now, when we talk about significance, both American and French Revolution, cause and significance has come in. Significance obviously is the declaration of right of man and citizen. Second is that it was had a rippling effect across the world. Liberty, fraternity now became a standard vocabulary. Third, Napoleon spread the ideas of what is called as French Revolution across Europe. Fourth is unification of Germany and Italy happened because of Napoleon itself. And fifth, which is that the French Revolution created the context in which now nationalism started to spread across Europe. This is basically the American and the French. Do we understand them? Because I will give you a short break here. And in the next set, we will do the next two revolutions, which is Industrial Revolution, Russian Revolution, and then we will go to the World Wars. Are we clear about this? Yes or no? Yes, sir? Okay. So it is right now 6:32. Let's come back at 6:50 and we will take the story forward. French Revolution done, American Revolution done, context done. Concert of Europe is basically an organization like the League of Nations which will take care of everything in Europe so that another French Revolution does not happen. What is to come is Industrial Revolution, Russian Revolution, First World War, Second World War. Four very important modules, right? Okay. See you in the next 20 minutes. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. What is the effect of American Revolution individually? See, when we talk about the American Revolution, First Republic, concept of liberty became very important. Then a rippling effect was then French Revolution. French Revolution, therefore, further, if you take into consideration what was its effect was that now the word, the concept of fraternity becomes very important. Plus, declaration of right of man and citizen is becoming very important. And there is going to be rise of nationalism. See, this was economic nationalism. This is political nationalism. So now political nationalism becomes very important concept that around political ideas you can further go. Right, Udit? Okay, can we start again? So we are done with the American Revolution. We are done with French Revolution. The British introduced three different land tax systems. Zamindari Malwari. Was this to collect money easily or did intent break traditional structures? Both. Break the traditional structure in such a way that they can collect more and more revenue out of the Indian system. So the both is the reason, but more about extracting revenue as much as possible. Right? Okay. If both of them are sorted, can I move to industrial revolution? Anybody, any doubt? Anybody, any doubt with American or French Revolution? No, yes, I'm waiting for your question. If when you say that no, sir, there is no issue with regards to American and French Revolution, you can start and go further. We will do that. Yes, sir, all clear. Is this enough for mains? Yes, whatever I'm teaching you, cause significance, cause significance, cause significance. Course is not asked. If you can stay with me for the next maybe 3 hours, 2.5 hours, anything which is going to come in the mains examination will be sorted. Don't have to worry. It can be done. Okay, I have everybody's consent. I'll start. Okay. Now, French Revolution is not easy to comprehend just with one go, but let's move. See, you don't have to get caught up here. You have to understand, see, what is more important is not this whole story. Is not what is important. What is important is causes. UPSC has asked questions out of this only. You cannot get caught up here because if you will never come out of it. It is a very big story with a lot of different, you can say, actors. So, what you have to understand is this and significance. Now, moving ahead. Now, when we talk about the French Revolution and Industrial Revolution, French and American Revolution, cause and significance is very important that I've established. Here, cause, significance, and impact. Three things have generally been in focus. Now, no, world history does not come in prelims. When we talk about the Industrial Revolution, there are three parts here. The first part is what is the Industrial Revolution? Then the second type of question is why Britain was the first to industrialize. Third is what are the unique points of France and Germany. And thereafter, thereafter, there is one more aspect, which is what is the impact of the Industrial Revolution. Once we're done with the Industrial Revolution, we'll move to road to First World War, Russian Revolution, Second World War. Very interesting tangent, which will take us close to, again, as I think, 2.5 hours to cover in the way we are going ahead. Right. Now, firstly, what is Industrial Revolution? Now, there is a very big myth that if the secondary sector, if the secondary sector exceeds the primary sector in output, which is GDP contribution, it is believed that the country has gone through industrial revolution, which is manufacturing producing more for the GDP than primary sector, which is agriculture. We believe that it is the concept of industrial revolution. However, this is just called industrialization. Only when the following process happens with, only when the following process happens with the second important process, then we call it an industrial revolution. This is called industrialization, which is you have factories outperforming the what is called as agricultural sector. However, the second more important concept is demography, which is when there is a movement of labor out of primary sector to secondary sector. This is called as together as industrial revolution. This is called as structural transformation. This is called as structural transformation. Structural transformation means that there is a demographic shift other than just an economic shift. Economic shift, if India, the second never happened because we became a mixed economy, tertiary sector became more important. There was never a movement out of primary to secondary per se. So, what is industrial revolution in a generic manner? You should know what it means. When we talk about industrial revolution in the context of Europe, the following things are considered to be the changes which were brought in by industrial revolution. For example, population explosion was there, 43% increase. Further agricultural expansion, new methods and contributions with regards to how they would manage the population itself. New technological changes, world trade became more interesting, and cheap raw material, and how all of these things come together to create a area in which an area in which basically new raw materials, new technology, new energy resources all were used to produce more and more through factories. This is basically called as industrial revolution in Europe. But industrial revolution did not happen in Europe as a whole, but happened in two phases, which is first phase was in Britain, first phase. Then it happened in second phase in France and Germany. And in third phase, it happened in Japan, USA, Russia, all of that. What we have to understand is why did it happen first in Britain? What is unique about France and Germany? So, what is industrial revolution? Industrial revolution is structural transformation with GDP output changing. At the same point of time, we have the concept of first phase, second phase, and third phase. More important for us is these two phases. And now let's try to understand why Britain industrialized first, or why was Britain the first country to industrialize? Now, in order to understand that, you have to understand the Britain, how it works. How it works. So, in the 1720s, in the 1720s, in the rural countryside, there is something called common land, there's something called private land, and the primary occupations which are available to the people is farmer, which is having their own land, or agri labor, which is working on someone else's land. Basically, peasant or tenant. These are the two available understanding. Now, when we talk about these two, it's a self-sufficient setup. Through this private land, 100 kgs is produced for 100 people, and they per se, there's no population pressure, there's no pressure on the system itself in the 1720s. But by 1750s, there is rising population. In the same setup now, there is population which is rising. Population rising means food has to be produced in higher numbers, and therefore there are two ways to manage a agrarian crisis or a food crisis. And population pressure on land has can be, in a way, managed by two ways. The first way is called agrarian expansion. But the problem in Britain is agrarian expansion is not available because of something called the enclosure movement. Enclosure movement was a movement which was started by the British Parliament in connivance with a lot of these big landlords, who basically started to cover the common land in the name of capitalistic agriculture. Basically, they usurped over common lands, and there was no land available for expansion. Because of this, the farmer job was not available. Primary occupation of farmer is not available. The second would have been agricultural technological development, which is increase. It was in connivance with the government. So people did oppose, but they were not able to do anything about it. This is basically productivity, agri productivity going up. Agri productivity going up. Now, agri productivity has to go up, so technological change is needed. And this is the route which the English took, which is they basically started to innovate in agriculture. So, there, for example, there was the Rotherham plow which was brought in, there was a seed drill which was brought in. So, for example, these innovations then allowed for agriculture to become more and more, you can say, productive, therefore managing the food crisis. But when agri productivity goes up, labor demand goes down because labor productivity goes up. So therefore there was no need of tenants in agriculture. There was no need for farmers in agriculture. All because agrarian expansion did not happen. Rather agricultural technological development happened. Common means everyone's land. Now, add to enclosure movement, agricultural development. What is the net outcome here? The net outcome is a surplus unemployed agricultural labor which basically has nothing to do. Add to it a long coastline, navigable rivers, available of coal and availability of coal and iron, a very stable political system. French Revolution was happening, but nothing happened in Britain. A church system which had minimal intervention. Colonies such as America initially, then India, and then Africa, and then New Zealand, and then Australia. And a banking system which is very stable. And with factory production increasing, there was a need for labor in the urban sector. And this is where this surplus unemployed labor started to flow towards the factories. And we have now both these conditions, or both the conditions being met, which is domestic markets were expanding, the national markets were expanding. At the same point of time, what is interesting is there is movement of labor out of the primary sector, secondary sector. At the same point of time, there is factory based production, and the secondary sector now started to outperform the primary sector. Therefore, have we now met both the conditions to say that that industrial revolution has happened? Yes or no? Come on, tell me. You have to be attentive here. Have we met both the conditions for the concept of industrial revolution? Yes. We have structural transformation because labor is moving, and we also have secondary sector performing more than outperforming the primary sector. So therefore, all of this is also helped by multiple inventions which will happen in cotton textile industries, which happens across this century. For example, the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, which produces very good spindles, with the water frame, which basically makes what is called as uses water to make the thread a little bit damp so that it does not break. The power loom, the spinning mule, all machine based productions using electricity to then produce textiles, cotton cloth at the rate which had never been seen. From sewing machine which had sewing or weaving at home, and cotton gin, which is called as removing the cotton, what we call as seed. All of these inventions together could produce thousands of meter of cloth per hour, vis-a-vis what was happening in India, which is our weavers were not able to compete with such cheap cotton. One of the reasons for deindustrialization was all of these factors coming together. So therefore, if a person asks you why Britain, the answer is enclosure movement. It is agricultural development. It is agricultural technological development. Thereafter, labor productivity going up, labor demand going down, productivity in agriculture going up, technological changes in the agriculture sector. Along with that, colonial markets, the need for factory based production, and the movement of this labor into factory based production, all allowed, with stable economy, stable polity, good banking system, all allowed Britain to become the foremost and the only industrial power in this world at that point of time. What are the inventions? Agriculture sector, Rotherham plow, which is a steel tip plow or an iron tip plow, which allows for better, you can say, digging into the hard soil of England. And also the seed drill adds four seeds at one time, removing the need for two more labor. So all of this basically together allows for better agricultural productivity. And Britain went through two phases of industrial revolution. First is called cotton phase. In this phase, it is the textile industry which basically became the foremost understanding. American cotton coming, Indian cotton coming, and the rise of what is called as the power loom. Now, at the same point of time, the second phase is called heavy industries phase. Railways, the concept of coal, mining, and steel. This happens between 1750s to 1800. This happens from 1800 to 1900, which is called as the second phase. How good banking system helps? Because good banking system allows for credit to be available to entrepreneurs who want to develop what is called as factories. All of these things come together to converge and create an understanding which is called the industrial revolution in England. So we know that industrial revolution happened in England because of these following reasons. First phase and second phase is also known. Now, let's be very clear that France and Germany were late, were late party, and that is where France, it was too politically unstable to actually do any of this. And Germany properly did not exist before 1871. It was Bismarck who brought Germany together. And when France and Germany actually go for second phase industrial revolution, they have what is called as the late comer advantage. Late comer advantage means they per se did not need to go through what is called as the industrial phase of cotton mill, cotton, this and that. They directly went to heavy industry. And because of the heavy industries, they directly went for steel, coal, all of that. And Germany overtook the British within 5 to 6 years of production. And that is something which is an economic rivalry which will develop between Germany and Britain, which is important for the First World War. But there were certain unique points also. For France, the unique points were protectionist measures, subsidies, and the state helping the industries developed quite a lot. There's a lot of support which the French government gives to its entrepreneurs and developing all the infrastructure which is needed to industrialize. In the similar fashion, for Germany, there was state support, but what was more important, there was a credit system. Banks were very well aligned with the commercial houses, and they were very quickly pushing all the savings of the people into the industries. They were also known for their what is called as specialization. They became very quickly automobile manufacturers, specialists of automobile manufacturing in the world. And this was a very important concept which they developed very quickly and were able to overtake the British. So, before we go to impact, when we talk about Britain and France, there was more intervention of the state here, less intervention of the state here, but more than what was there in Britain. Both had their own unique features, but both needed state support to compete with the British, who had now become the foremost industrial power. Now, what is the general impact of the Industrial Revolution? When we talk about the general impact of the Industrial Revolution, it is one of the worst of the worst. Colonies and colonial exploitation accelerated because of the Industrial Revolution. We know that deindustrialization, drain of wealth, we went through a lot because of the Industrial Revolution. Further, the state and the industrialists came together, which is called a capitalistic state came into context. Similarly, now military technology was revolutionary. And when military technology is revolutionized, mass destruction became possible. Weapons of mass destruction. Previously, a sword could kill 50 people, 60 people in one day. Now there's a bomb which can kill 1,000 to 2,000 people in a day, in one instance. Therefore, military technology became so destructive that now it became a threat to humanity itself. Further, industrial revolution, capitalism only produces what is called as haves and have nots, which is people, capitalists like Adani and Ambani, who have a lot of money. Whilst at the same point of time, the slum dwelling labor who are so ostracized, who have nothing to eat if they don't go to the factory itself. Further, the first commodity which was produced by the Industrial Revolution is nothing but the concept of time. Time became money, money is time, and at the same point of time, time was something which could be lost but could not be saved. And the idea that you have to be productive, laziness is a bad virtue. All of these concepts were brought in by the Industrial Revolution. If this was not enough, all forms of death, destitution, slums, urbanization, which was not planned, and the concept of nuclear family, the concept of women being in the public and private, because she was now being in the public and private both. She's at the same point of time being a mother but also a labor. Our dietary habits changed. Food had to become fast. Food cannot be savored. You had to basically eat and gobble as much as possible. Tea became a very staple concept because tea gives you calories and also takes away your hunger. And it created the context for something like Marxism and socialism to rise, which we will discuss under Russian Revolution. So, before we go to the road to the First World War, which would include Russian Revolution, we have discussed the American Revolution, French Revolution, Industrial Revolution. Cause, cause, significance. Why Britain? What is the French? What is the Industrial? And the general impact. Anybody has any issue? Because once we enter into that tangent, when we come out, we're going to end this session itself. We will enter through what is called as the Eastern question, and we'll exit through the concept of Japan surrendering after the war is over. In between, if needed, I will give you a break if needed and if you want it. Right? Okay. Are we clear? All clear. Very good. Now, in order to understand in short, one or 2 points if about what? American Revolution, French Revolution, or Industrial Revolution? I'll give you a break after maybe First World War. Then we'll take a break and then we can push. Industrial Revolution, what is it? GDP contribution secondary sector, demographic change, plus why Britain, enclosure movement and technological development, general impact, debt destruction, child labor, and all forms of poverty and inequality in the world is because of industrial revolution. Now, in order to understand the world wars, the idea of American Revolution and spreading liberty is very important. The idea of French Revolution and the concept of nationalism is very, very important. And the idea of Industrial Revolution is very important because it made military technology a very destructive technology per se, and also made the states more and more hungry for power and money. Now, when we talk about World War One, you cannot discuss World War One directly without understanding the processes which happened between 1800 to 1912 in Europe. And that starts, or that conversation starts with with this sector, which is called the Balkan sector. Unification of Germany, Italy is not a very, very, you can say, yielding areas. If you need, I can discuss it in the end. Unification of Germany, Italy question has not come for the past at least 7 to 8 years. Now, when we talk about the Balkan sector, the story is important because of its strategic location. The Black Sea, Dardanelles Strait, the Adriatic Sea, and the Aegean Sea, and the access to Suez Canal. We'll talk about Japan when we'll talk about Second World War, First World War, and its end. So, very simple sector. A very simple point is that Balkan sector is very, very important. But the time at which we are looking at the Balkan sector does not look like this. It is rather a part of something called the Ottoman Empire. It is rather a part of something called the Ottoman Empire. When it is part of the Ottoman Empire was spread across three different continents. It was in Europe, it was in Northern Africa, it was in Asia also. Again, that discussion of Japan Industrial Revolution, we'll discuss it when we'll bring Japan into the picture. Now, Northern Africa, Europe, and Asia, we don't care about the Sinai Peninsula, we don't care about North Africa, but we care about Europe. And what do we understand by that is, see, the this sector was actually under the Ottomans, all Ottoman territory. Now, being under the Ottomans, one of the biggest issues which this sector has is Ottomans are Islamic, whilst most of Eastern Europe is actually Christian. So this was like a buffer sector, Islam here, Christianity here. And for a very, very long time, though the Ottomans had actually ruled this sector, they had not Ottomanized or changed the nationality of these people, which is there were Turks, Arabs, Serbians, Bulgarians, Romanians, Greeks, Hungarians, more closer to the Russians as Slavs, but they had not been, you can say, Ottomanized, made to convert to Christianity, convert to Islam. That is why, in the era of nationalism after French Revolution, this sector became explosive, and that is where there comes a very interesting question. When we turn our attention in 1800 towards the Ottomans were not in a very good shape. Capturing Constantinople in 1453, close to 300 years of rule, now the Ottomans were showing a lot of fissures and a lot of cracks. And this leads us to a very important question, which is called the Eastern question. The Eastern question was, since 1500 more, 1400 more or less, mid 1400s, the very nationality, you can say ethnically diverse, nationally different, and very explosive sector of the Balkans was under the Ottomans. The Ottomans controlled it. The nationalism was down, and there was no issue of Eastern Europe generally being an area of explosive nature, and it was a buffer area. But with the Central Ottoman authority declining, what would happen to the Eastern European sector or Southeastern European sector? With rising nationalism and threat of collapse of the Ottomans, what should the what should happen to the Balkans, or what should be the response of the Europeans to this decline? And in the process of answering to this question, that what should the Ottomans per se do, or what should be our response to the Ottomans, this in turn leads to the First World War to start. That is the most interesting thing. Meaning, if you have to understand the First World War, you have to go at least 100 years before it. Now, see, this whole sector, whatever you see in purple is Ottoman Empire. This area per se is very, very diverse, but is part of the Ottoman Empire. You have Austria, Austrian Hungarian Empire, Holy Roman Empire here, France, Britain, and Russia. Now, when it comes to the outcome, or what is the answer to the Eastern question, Russia wants the Ottomans to decline. The reason for that is, other than having what is called as St. Petersburg as a port here, their only way to have an all-weather port was via the Black Sea, via the Dardanelles Strait. So if the Ottomans decline, the Russians can expand beyond the Crimean Peninsula into this sector. But if Russia expands, this sector, the Suez Canal, would become a problematic aspect. Therefore, Britain and France per se, in order to manage Russia, did not want the Ottomans to decline very quickly and wanted this sector to be very, very stable. Similarly, the Austrians don't want the sector to become too explosive because it is their southern border. Therefore, Russia is the only country which wants the Ottomans to decline, whilst France, Britain, and Austria, along with Germany, later which will emerge here, Germany would want the Ottomans to be in place so that this area does not become too explosive per se. So every great power, as they're called, had a different answer to this question. And that is where the answer to this Eastern question is the context of the rise of what is called as the First World War. If the minorities got independent, this whole sector would become too problematic. If the Ottomans are too strong, the Christian minorities will be ostracized. Therefore, the road to the First World War was a very self contradictory answer to the Great Eastern Question. Now, the following events basically create certain tendencies across Europe, and these tendencies in 1900 are very important in order to understand the First World War. If you want to understand the First World War, you have to understand these four events not in detail, but in order to understand the larger ebb and flow here. What do I mean by larger ebb and flow? Which is, see, Serbia, Serbia is a country here. Is this a country here? See, Serbia wanted independence from the Ottomans. They fought a very long drawn battle between 1804 to 1833 also. And Serbians looked towards the Russians for support. However, when the Serbians were fighting for independence, nobody came to their help. Nobody came to help them generally. And they fought their own war of independence. That is where Serbia starts to develop a hatred for the West, which is they started to feel that Britain and France don't support their struggle. The very important point which you have to understand that through the Serbian revolution, there are two outcomes, which is Serbians feel that they have been left alone and they are basically being betrayed by the whole West and nobody came to their help. Why is this important? Because if you look at vis-a-vis Greek freedom struggle, which happens in the same period between 1814 and 1829, the Greeks who are here, they are a more known nationality, men of a lot of, you can say, intellect. Mostly the captains of all of the boats in this sector used to be Greeks. So when the Greeks were fighting for their independence between 1814 and 1809, they tried everything to get independent. They tried to have a certain secret society, Free Eritrea, did not work. Ottomans used to always take control of the Greeks. This is where the most unlikeliest of powers, Russia, intervened and said that I will help you, Greece, in getting independent. So Greece, which was fighting for its independence versus the Ottoman Empire, Russia attacks the Ottoman Empire. What is even more interesting is because Russia attacked, and if Greece got independence because of Russia, Britain and France would had a feeling that Russia would become powerful and Greece would become pro Russia. So Britain and France both intervened in the Greek War of Independence, but nobody had intervened in the Serbian War of Independence. So the Serbians used to feel that they were actually considered to be untouchables in this story, whilst Greece was being given its independence on a platter, which was even recognized as early as in 1829. And Greek independence, Serbian independence will not be recognized even till 1880s in that regard. This is going to create a very interesting situation. Two tendencies had now come up in Europe. First, the Serbians feeling that they had been cheated by the West. Second, the Greeks been given their independence on a platter, which means that great powers got involved in local and regional issues. This was an issue between Greece and Ottomans. They got involved so as to show that they were, in a way, a pro or anti somebody. So, in through these two events, we see two interesting tendencies between 1804 and 1830, which is big powers getting involved in small issues and the Serbians hating everything, which is because they were left alone by the West per se. Now, this leads us to the next major event, which is called the Crimean War. See, the Crimean War, which was fought in the Crimean Peninsula sector, the idea is very simple. Russia wanted control over these sectors. So there was a clash. Why Ottomans want control over Greece? Ottomans already control Greece. The Greeks are fighting independence from the Ottomans. Now, Russia and France went into a religious conflict over a sector which was in modern day Palestine, Israel. In the 1853 period, there was a certain tract of land which was considered to be Christian, and the Ottomans wanted to give the Christians back their territory. This is where the Ottomans had two options. This Christian territory could be given to the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is basically Russia, or could be given to the protector of the Roman Catholic Church, which is the French. What is interesting is that initially the churches had come up with a certain solution that this land will be divided into 50-50%. But once Tsar Nicholas, Tsar meaning King Nicholas, like first got to know in Russia that they were not getting full or all of the control. That is where the Romans basically gave some of the land to the French and some of the land to the to the Russians. But Tsar Nicholas I wanted all of this territory. That is where Russia went into a conflict with the Ottomans, saying Tsar Nicholas I said that no, you have to give me all this land. And this is the context for what is called as the Crimean War. Crimean War, issue of religious land, issue of churches, Ottomans giving certain part of the land to the French, but not to the Russians fully. Russia, and this event is important because no compromise was a tendency which developed in England, and rather in England or in Europe rather, which is nobody wanted to compromise. A good compromise had been brought up by the churches, but Russia was not ready to compromise. France was not ready to. It is in this context that in the Crimean War, Russians are going to attack the Ottomans, and the same British and the French who had protected the Greeks over the Ottomans are now going to come for the help of the Ottomans. So now they will fight with Russia in this war. Fight in Russia. And that is where Russia will be defeated in this war, and the whole Black Sea will be demilitarized. What is more important is Russia was humiliated once in this century, and the next humiliation is going to come in what is called as the Great Eastern Crisis. Great Eastern Crisis is when Russia does not want to fight with the Ottomans directly. So the Russians tell the Romanians, the Serbians, that why don't you ask for independence from the Ottomans? And that is where the Ottomans attack the west southeastern sector, and the Russians come in the support of the Ottomans. In this war, again, Britain and France will come to the help of the Ottomans, but this time Germany will also come to the context of helping the Ottomans, and this war will end in 1878 with the Congress of Berlin, which is considered to be the prelude to this war. Now, what are the tendencies which we have seen are at work here? Through the 1800 to 1900 period, first is that Serbians hate the West. Second is no compromise. Third is great powers, great powers get involved in in local issues. Fourth, there is war is the only solution. And fifth, Russia is subdued twice and ceases to be a problem. And this is the problematic map of Eastern Europe. This is what you have to enumerate. This is what you have to write in the examination before you can actually talk about the First World War. Now, what is this problematic map of Berlin? See, the Congress of Berlin, when it meets, it creates a very, very disastrous map of Eastern Europe. In the Congress of Berlin, four Balkan states Greece, Serbia, Romania, Montenegro, Britain, France, Germany, Austria, Italy, Russia, led by Bismarck, all of these powers came together. 10 powers are there. Now, what they do is they recognize the Greeks and their independence. They recognize Serbian independence. They carve out a sector out of this area which is called as Bosnia. Now remember this point. Bosnia is shown in the map of Ottomans but is controlled by Austria. It's called dual control. Austria controls Bosnia administratively, but Ottomans are basically the owners of this sector, or it is a part of the Ottoman Empire. Similarly, Bulgaria is independently ruled, but is again shown in the Ottoman map. This is where this was already recipe for conflict. Why? Because there are two sectors, Bulgaria and Bosnia, who are dualistic control, independently and by Ottomans, Austria and the what we call as Ottomans. At the same point of time, Serbia became a landlocked country. This is something which the Serbians did not like. They always wanted an access to the Adriatic Sea, and they wanted Bosnia because Bosnia is mostly Serbian. And this is where now the events which will happen between 1900 to 1912 will then dictate how the First World War will start. Now, the first of these issues is called the Moroccan crisis. So, we had four events there. We have six events or five events here. The Moroccan crisis, which happened in 1905 1906, is an interesting one because Morocco was a sector which was actually controlled by the French. English used to control Egypt, France used to control Morocco. Both recognize each other's power. But Moroccan Sultan went to the Germans and said to the Germans that you have to protect my sovereignty. There was a whole Berlin conference which happened in which Germany said that Morocco should not be touched. It is a power which is protected by the Germans. But as soon as this conference ended, French took over Morocco and nobody said nothing. And that is where there was a major diplomatic humiliation. Diplomatic humiliation which happened for the Germans, because though the Germans had said that nobody should actually touch the Moroccans, they were touched by the French. And no, it is not actually the Ottomans per se, it is a clash of egos. All these tendencies, along with Germans feeling more and more threatened, was even more dangerous. Then in 1907, something interesting happens, which is called a very unlikeliest of facts. France and Russia were already in a secret alliance. France and Britain was in a secret alliance. And Russia and Britain go into a secret alliance. This alliance in turn becomes very dangerous for a country called Germany because now it has been encircled. And therefore, at the same point of time where it felt that it had been humiliated, it also feels threatened. But the trigger of this war does not come from either Germany or Britain or France. It comes from Serbia. Bosnian crisis was a conflict between Austria and Ottomans over who controls Bosnia. Austria wins, and now Austria controls Bosnia directly. And now the Balkan sector becomes even more volatile because These countries come together, all of these countries come together to again fight with the Ottomans. And in the first Balkan War, what happened is that Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, and Greece come together to take whatever was possible of the Ottomans. But Germany intervened. But what they did wrong in this story is rather than giving this sector, which is called as Albania, to the Serbians, it is created as a new country. And there's a conflict which brews over what is called as Macedonia between Serbia and Bulgaria. And the Second Balkan War, which happens in 1912, is a conflict between Serbia and Bulgaria, and Serbia wins. So for the Serbians, 1911 is a period which is not considered good because they lost Albania. But in 1912, they finally win something, and now they're elated. This creates the context of what is called as the First World War. Now, before I go to the First World War, which is going to start because of the Sarajevo crisis, understand what has happened generally. There are certain tendencies at play, which we've already discussed. Serbia has become extremely aggressive towards this idea that we want access to the sea, and they want Bosnia beyond exception. Britain is jealous of the Germans because of their what is called as economic growth. Both are in also in an arms race because the British have developed what is called as dreadnought ships. Germany has developed U-boats. There's economic rivalry, there's colonial rivalry, and the arms race is something which does not work. Tendencies plus Serbian aggression all together comes out in what is called as the Sarajevo crisis. Now the Bosnians want to basically take control, or rather the Serbians want to take control over Bosnia, and a Serbian terrorist, if you want to call him, Gavrilo Princip, is going to then shoot Archduke Ferdinand and his wife in Sarajevo, which was the capital of Bosnia. And the king to be and the king queen to be were now dead. And this will trigger the First World War. In order to understand why the First World War happened, you have to understand why was Serbia doing what it was doing. Serbia wanted access to Bosnia, which it did not get. It wanted access to Albania, it did not get. And it saw Austria as the biggest villain in its story. Serbia wanted access to this way or this way. Both were blocked by Austria. So therefore, Serbia now pushed through and tried to capture Bosnia via Gavrilo Princip. Are we all on the same page? And do you understand the larger ebb and flow here? Because First World War is actually quite complicated. You cannot fathom how things work. You have to keep all of these events together. All of these events have to come together. The four in 1800 and the five in 1900 all together give us a larger perspective. If this makes sense, then we will go into the course of the war. The causes of the war is in front of you. I hope there is no issue ever in that. Clear, everybody? Yes? Okay. Now, see, Serbia has attacked Austria. So, Austria, can you summarize? I have summarized here. Tendencies, no compromise, war as solution, great powers get involved in small things, economic rivalry and arms race, and the colonial rivalry between Britain and Germany, Serbian aggression to take Bosnia. These are the 4 5 basic factors which all come together in this. Now, Serbia has killed the of or the king and queen to be of Austria. Austria sends a certain list of demands. If accepted, Austria will not attack Serbia. Serbia accepts all demands, just one, which is that we will not give up the demand of Bosnia. So, therefore, what happens is that Austria attacks Serbia, a very natural response. But what is interesting is as soon as Austria is going to attack Serbia, Serbia will send a message to the Russians that we are Slavs, please help us. You have to help us. And that is where, in the most unlikeliest of fashions, the Russians are going to start to mobilize their army towards the western border of their own country. This was considered to be problematic by Austria because Austria felt that this was now going to go out of hand. So Germany now says to Russia, why are you mobilizing? When when Germany sends a message to the Russians, stop mobilizing on your western border. It is a conflict between Austria and Serbia, and the Russians don't stop mobilization. In the most unlikeliest of ways and manners, Germany attacks Russia. This is the most interesting thing. Now Serbia goes out of context and Germany attacks Russia. When Russia is attacked by Germany, France says to Germany, why did you attack Russia? So then Germany attacks France via Netherlands and Belgium, saying that I already hated you. And therefore, now somehow what was started between Serbia and Austria has mushroomed into Germany attacking both its neighbors over the issue of Serbia and Austria. Now, because Netherlands was a country whose defense was kept neutral by the British, as soon as the Germans enter Netherlands and Belgium, the British attacked Germany because they had violated Belgium neutrality. So, what is interesting here is that Serbia started this war, but the person who was fighting on three fronts now was Germany on one front, the French, one front, the Russians, and on one front, the United Kingdom. What is even more interesting is you cannot understand this sequence of events if you don't understand the events which have happened before this. As you can see previously, because Germany was diplomatically humiliated, felt threatened. Because United Kingdom had a jealousy towards Germany. Because France had gone into a secret alliance with Russians and United Kingdom. And because Austro-Hungary had an issue with Serbia, and Serbia always wanted Bosnia, and because war was the only solution, nobody wanted to compromise, and there was a tendency for great powers to get involved in smaller issues, all of these things led to a point where an avoidable war had now started in Europe, which was called the First World War. This is the sequence of events which led to the development of the First World. Are we clear about the First World War developments and course generally? Yes or no? Yes? Yes? Okay. Now, how does the war go ahead? 1914, the war starts. And I'll go year by year to explain to you how the war goes ahead. But you have to understand one thing, there is no way you can write it in the examination again. So, there are two fronts which have been created: Eastern Front, Western Front. Now, the Western Front in 1914 becomes extremely blocked very quickly. Meaning, though the Germans were able to thrust like this, they get stuck around Maginot Line, and the United Kingdom has also entered this war. So, therefore, this became a stalemate very quickly. Became a stalemate very, very quickly. Nobody was going nowhere. It was trench warfare, very slow warfare. At the same point of time, here the Germans were able to, the Russians were able to defeat the Austro-Hungarians, but Germans were able to defeat the Russians. The only reason this war stretched so much was everybody was equally matched, but there were small wins which the Germans kept on getting in this period in 1914 per se. So there is a stalemate on one sector, the other one, nobody is moving much beyond this point. Now, in 1914, 1915 and 1914, late 1914 and 1915, Britain and France asked Italy that you wanted some territory from Austria. Why don't you enter this war? And Italy attacks the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And now there is a southern front also. But in order to counter something, Germany then invites Germany then invites the Ottoman Empire to become a part of the Central Powers, whilst the Allied powers had added Italy. So you can see it has very quickly become a continental war. United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Russia together are fighting. this alliance of Germany, Austria, and Ottomans. Ottomans were only given one task: don't let the Russians enter into the Dardanelles Strait or into the Adriatic Sea, which they did very well in doing it. In other things, they were useless. So as you can see that by 1915, it was very clear that the war was not going anywhere. It was a stalemate, more or less. That is why now from 1915 onwards, the war shifted to the high seas. And the biggest point is that Germany was getting supplies from this sector, but the biggest supplier of United Kingdom and France was a country called the USA. The Americans basically were supplying a lot of arms and ammunitions to the Allied powers. Germany saw that as a problem. And in 1915, 1916, they start what is called as the U-boat campaign, where the Germans started to attack the ships of the Americans coming towards the, the what we call as European sector. So and Lusitania, Sussex, two ships were actually attacked, and now they feel that this is not the correct way of going ahead with this, and the war has now gone beyond territorial warfare into naval warfare. But in this whole episode, something quite interesting happens, which is whilst the Americans are supplying ammunition to the French and the English, Germans wanted to export this war from this continent to this continent. And this is called as the Zimmermann plan. This is called as the Zimmermann plan. Basically, there is a interception of a telegraph which was sent from Zimmermann, the foreign minister of Germany, to the Mexican, you can say, dictator, that you attack to United Kingdoms from the southern border. As soon as Zimmermann plan is revealed in 1917, early 1917, April of 1917, America enters the war because it feels that Germany is trying to export the war beyond the continent. But at the same point of time, in December of 1917, Russia is going to exit the war because of the Russian Revolution. However, Germany was now surrounded by too many powers. Italy on one side, France on one side, United Kingdoms, a fresh Americans entering, Russia exiting, but still Germany was on the back foot. And that is where by 1918 November, Germany was so tired of this war that it will basically surrender in 1918 through the armistice, and they will sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1918 1919, the most humiliating treaty of this century. And the First World War ends with the German surrender, and the Treaty of Versailles was signed after the following things had happened to the world. Close to 3 crore people were dead. One of the first bloodiest wars of the century had happened, and the casualties were not in thousands but in lakhs. Similarly, there was a new map which was put into place, which is called the Treaty of Versailles map. This I will discuss with you after the break because you need a certain break here. But depopulation across most of the countries, GDP started to degrow. There is debt across this whole sector. Inflation was in double, triple digits in certain cases. Industrial production was down. First World War had now destroyed the whole sector, and we had not seen a war like this previously. So I hope that you understand that the course of the war again cannot be asked in the examination because there's no way to ask it also. There's no way to ask it also because how can they ask you this whole story which I have taken at least 20 minutes to tell you. So the causes of the First World War should be clear in your mind. The course of the second First World War is basically how it moved from territorial warfare towards the concept of what is called as a naval battle, and America entering because of Zimmermann plan. And the significance obviously is severe depopulation, debt, and destruction. But the most is Treaty of Versailles. This is our next important point which we have to enter from. And when we enter it, we are now moving towards the Second World War, interwar period. and Great Depression, and basically I will in between this also do Russian Revolution. So if you think that you have followed the train of thought till this point, this is the last break. Once we go ahead from this break, we will then finish this discussion. I hope till this point everything is making sense and you're understanding the larger ebb and flow of what we are trying to do here. So it is around exactly 8 o'clock. Let's come back at 8:15, 8:15, 8:20, and we will then go for one burst till 9:30, 10 and finish everything. Right? So this is your second break. We are now done with French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, Russian and American Revolution. First World War is also done. What we have to do is now go from interwar period towards Second World War and end this. Clear, everyone? So I hope you will join me back at 8. Thank you. I will see you in the next 15 to 20. Okay, welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back. Right. All set to make the world fight again? Yes, sir. Come on. Okay, great. So let's again start our understanding. Welcome back. Great. Okay, great to see you. Okay, let's make the world fight again. Now, we have understood till this point a lot of things, right? We've understood the French Revolution, who had joined me around 5:30, 5 o'clock. We discussed the American Revolution, discussed the Industrial Revolution, all as context for the Eastern question. From Eastern question, we were able to further move towards what is called as the road to the world First World War. We discussed tendencies, then we were able to discuss causes, course, and now we are at the point of outcome. Outcome of this war is the Treaty of Versailles, right? Treaty of Versailles is generally considered to be the worst treaty ever signed in the history of the world. Why? Because see, everybody had a different agenda. Germany wanted to just sign this treaty. They were not even asked to come to the Paris Treaty, or what is called the Treaty of Versailles. France wanted to ruin Germany. Britain wanted to keep Germany alive so that they could pay reparations. And USA, through Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, wanted to avoid another war. Now, this is considered to be the most humiliating treaty signed by Germany because it took away everything from Germany. A certain part was given to France. Denmark was, in a way, given the North Slits area. The West Prussia and the certain areas were given to Poland. The whole Saar region was open to everybody. The union of Austria and Germany was prevented. Germany could only have 1 lakh troops. They had been demilitarized. The whole Rhineland can only have 6 battleships. Further, this is the most humiliating clause, which is called as the 6,600 million reparation, which the Germans now had to pay to the victors. This is a very big point because 6,600 million pounds was the reparation which they had to pay to the world. And the League of Nations, the most useless organization which was created to prevent a war again, was not able to do anything. Now, the reason why actually the Second World War was going to happen is because of the treaty itself and the map which was created after this treaty, which is basically called the post Versailles map. Now, see what the Versailles did was this: we have France, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Germany. But now, from German territory, there was a half of the German territory, Poland was created. Russia, which had now become Soviet Union, lost Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and half of it was then pushed into Poland. Poland was created by taking half of Germany, half of Russia. Further, Austria was now made into a very small country. Along with that, you have Hungary, the Transylvania sector, Czechoslovakia, Galicia, and what is called initially as the Kingdom of Croats and Slovenes, later will be called as Yugoslavia when it will fall under the trap of the dictator itself. Albania, Bulgaria, Greece, Turkey, all are there. Russian SSR, all of this territory which you see here is called as the USSR, the story which I will tell you what is going to happen in the background. But what is the most important feature in this sector is that these are all very, very fragile democracies, have no understanding of what democracy per se is. And further, what you have to understand is that this sector is too fragile for a Germany type power, which will then use it to its advantage. Poland, as it is, has a territorial dispute with Germany, has it with the USSR, has it with Czechoslovakia. Very messy map was created. Never give a European a map to create because they're very bad at cartography. They will mess up the whole map itself. Now, a tangent which we have to go into is why did USSR get penalized and what is the issue there. This tangent is basically of the Russian Revolution. Please pay attention. I will teach you two to three things here. First, what is the Russian Revolution and what is socialism, communism, and these basic words which are there. Now, see, Russia had been the villain of the world between 1800 to 1900 when it came to the British and the Germans, British and the French. But in 1904, it will also be defeated in 1905. It will be defeated by the Japanese. Now, when the Japanese will defeat the Russians in what is called as the Russo-Japanese War over Manchuria, they will actually be properly humiliated. Sector, and what will happen is that the Russians will now protest for change. That will lead to the 1905, what is called as the October Manifesto. October Manifesto. The October Manifesto basically was based on the idea that we will make Russia into a constitutional monarchy, and this constitutional monarchy was headed by, at this point of time, a person called Tsar Nicholas II. However, in this process of creating a constitutional monarchy and a Duma, which is parliament, there were internal changes which were happening within Russia because of the very bad conditions of agriculture, workers, and a state driven, what we call as industrial revolution, food issues, and same French type issues which led to the French Revolution. This in turn led to the rise of what is called as Marxist ideas in Russia. Now, what does these words Marxism, socialism, and communism mean? As we have seen in the syllabus, these are directly quoted. See, Marxism is an ideology of what is called as economic determination or dialectical materialism. The idea that the human race had gone through what is called as primitive accumulation, then through slave based production, then through feudalism, and was right now in the capitalistic mode. But the capitalistic mode is very exploitative. It's exploitative of the workers. And the idea within Marxism was that the workers of the world will unite one day. And when they will unite, the workers will come together, topple the base. Rather, from the base will topple the superstructure, vulgar Marxism as you want to call it, and the capitalist order will be destroyed. The point is, because capitalism is inherently exploitative, the workers will get united one day. Now, what the workers will first produce, therefore, is socialism, a state which is run by the proletariat or the what is called as the worker, and this worker is going to then go for equality. It will work for equality, it will redistribute wealth, it will redistribute all the money, and once this state has achieved complete equality, it will go to a utopian space of called communism, a classless, stateless, equal society where everybody produces for everyone. And the idea that socialism is the second, is the, you can say, fifth stage, and communism is the last stage of human existence. The idea is very simple. Socialist means that you are trying to redistribute wealth. Communist means that there is complete equality. This was never going to be achieved. No country has ever become like this. It is a utopia. However, on the other hand, socialism is an idea which you can embody as a point of what is called as different forms of socialism. Fabian socialism says we can bring in this type of change through democratic process, what is in India. Then you have what is called as libertarian socialism. You have very hard form of socialism which says that you have to have cooperatives and the state should not control a state should control everything. PSU is also an idea which is based out of this. These ideas were created by Marx and Engels, and Marxism is based on that ideology. This idea will start to percolate into Russia after 1905, and there will be three, rather one major party which is going to emerge, which is called Russian Revolutionary Party, then Social Democratic Labour Party, and Social Revolutionaries. Thereafter, the Social Democratic Labour Party is going to split up into what is called as Bolshevik and Menshevik. And this is where our main story lies. Bolsheviks, who means majority, Menshevik, who means minorities. Now, what is this majority and minority? This is where you have to understand the difference between who Vladimir Lenin is and what is the difference between a Bolshevik and a Menshevik. Mensheviks basically believe in Marx, who say that industrial revolution has to come first, then socialist revolution. Whilst Lenin used to say that industrial revolution is not needed first, we can go for a socialistic revolution and then for industrial revolution. He was in a hurry per se. And this in turn will lead to a whole plethora of changes which will happen after First World War, which is called the February and the October Revolution. Under the February Revolution, Russia will first become a republic itself because Mikhail, who was the brother of Tsar Nicholas II, said he did not want to take power. And this will not further quench the, you can say, thirst of the people for change. The First World War made no sense for Russia. There was nothing which they were going to achieve as it is. And Lenin, when he will return, he will talk about the April theses. And when Lenin will then say to the Bolsheviks, the party, you have to capture power, that capture of power will happen because of when the Kirilov, who was basically the military general, he will try to capture power. People understood that now we have to trust somebody, and they will trust the Soviets and Lenin, and this in turn will lead to the October Revolution, and the Russian Revolution was complete. The first socialist country was in context. But between 1917 to 1925, because the West hated Russia so much, they made them sign such a humiliating treaty. There was a civil war which is going to happen between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks, and this was a war which was funded by the West. The West now started to fear the concept of socialism, which said that capitalism should be destroyed, will be destroyed. And only in 1925, Lenin is going to then create USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and then after the death of after the death of Lenin, Stalin will take. So our first actor is in place. Russia has now become USSR because of the Bolshevik Revolution. There is a counter ideology which exists in Russia, which says that the whole capitalistic West is going to go drain because Bolshevism is coming, and now Soviet Union will try to push Bolshevism into this sector and also become an ideology which was feared. So our first actor is in place. Socialistic fear is in place. The second issue is going to be how the world was going into a illusion of collective security. Illusion of collective security means that through the Washington Conference, Japan, who had helped Russia, who had helped the Americans and the British at this point of time to seize German colonies, will be brought to the table, made into a big boy. There will be the Genova Conference where France and Germany will try to come together, will not be able to. But the two countries which had actually lost out the most, which is Germany and Russia, will come together in the Rapallo Treaty. And now Russia will help Germany militarize a little bit. But the Locarno Treaty is considered to the honeymoon of Europe, where everybody thought that there is going to be nothing. Mutual non-aggression treaty between Germany, France, Belgium, Britain, Italy, Poland, Czechoslovakia, but nothing was going to happen. But for Germany, a moral victory came in 1928, which is called as the Young Plan. That the reparation which was asked 6,600 million was too much, and it was reduced by one third to 2,200 million, something where the Germans started to feel that the Treaty of Versailles was to humiliate them. Now this sector is dangerous because if somebody dangerous rises in Germany, it will in turn lead to this sector to become as it is problematic. And that is where you have to add now the Great Depression. See, we have understood that the causes of the Second World War was first the Treaty of Versailles. It was also the messed up map of Europe, plus the rise of socialism and USSR, plus the fragile democracies. Fragile democracies are easy for Hitler to use later. But one major cause. Anybody has any issue to this point? Anybody? Any issue? Right. Now, add to this the Great Depression. something which was there between 1929 to 32 and will allow multiple dictators to. Now, what is the Great Depression? Very simple. 1919 to 1925, there was a war boom effect, which is output, though was reducing, there was an idea that everything was perfectly fine. Things were very jolly good, jolly good. However, overproduction had started to happen once the war was over. Domestic overproduction was problematic. America, the only power which benefited of the First World War, closed its economy. So when it closed its economy, Europe also closed its economy, which is there was a lot of tariff barriers which were created. Now in the USA, domestic overproduction meant that too much demand was now replaced by very less demand. Supply was still trying to cope up with this demand and trying to reduce itself. There was a mismatch, which means that there is going to be unemployment. When there is unemployment, there is consumption which goes down because people don't have money. When consumption goes down, there is further unemployment because demand goes down. And when demand goes down and unemployment happens, then further consumption goes down. This is called a deflationary spiral or a recessionary spiral. Recessionary spiral is happening. America cannot export to the European sector its excess. The state was not managing the crisis well. And on 29th October 1929, when the people in the market, in the stock market, will realize that all of this is just a bubble where domestic overproduction is happening and the base effect is not taken into consideration, on 29th October 1929, investor will take out the money out of the Wall Street, which is called Bloody Sunday. And what is going to happen is called the Great Depression will set in. And now between 1929 to 32, the world will go through the biggest recession in the world till today. There will be bank run, banks will become bankrupted, their money will be lost in the market, and this referring effect from the New York Stock Exchange will go to London Stock Exchange, will go across the whole sector itself, and there will be only death and destruction, recession across the world. This is a important factor for fascism to rise. Now, this is where we bring in our last and most important factor for the Second World War, which is called fascism. What is fascism? You have to understand what is the concept of fascism. Fascism with a big F means ideology, small f means Italy. So, fascism is an ideology which is an ultra nationalistic concept where anything and everything is acceptable in the name of the nation. At the same point of time, they are anti-socialists. So basically, they say that we will protect you, oh capitalistic understanding and a capitalistic order. We are anti-socialist. We will protect you. They are based on a charismatic leader, and the charismatic leader is the one who basically has a cult following behind him. They use propaganda very well, which is they use modern press very, very well. They also are master manipulators. They will change their statement at any given point in time. And fascists are extremely conservative, but also pro capitalistic. This is what fascism meant at this point. And this fascist, or the first fascist to rise in the world, was in Italy. And his name was Benito Mussolini. The reason for him to rise was very simple because he used certain factors to his advantage. For example, Italy had been promised a lot of things in the Treaty of Versailles. It was not given that. Second, socialism was at the rise, and there was a very big sphere of socialism across Italy. Further, there was also something called the rise of the left, and private property was now under a lot of threat. Italy also had a very bad experience with what is called as democracy because they had something called proportional representation. Proportional representation meant that any time a government party or any time of government you can say, came to power, it was based on vote share, and democracy was now considered to be unstable. And all of this allowed for Benito Mussolini to say that he is the answer. He is considered to be the father of fascism as an ideology, and from disappointment with the gains of First World War to the economic effects of the war itself, to contempt towards parliamentary system, to the strikes which were happening, the Fascista Party, the National Fascist Party of Mussolini, had a certain charisma. He was considered to be the man with the solution, and therefore he was now being considered a solution to the larger problems which Italy was facing. And this is where he will in 1922 there was a general strike which was basically asked for by the left in Germany, in Italy. In response to that, he will do what is called as the March on Rome. And when he will do March on Rome in 1922 October, he will be then invited by the king, Victor Emmanuel III, that you can become the prime minister. Benito Mussolini therefore became a prime minister of Mussolini, became the prime minister of Italy without even contesting elections. Once he will enter the, you can say, system, he will break the system from within, which is called the Escrebo laws, and then proclaim himself as Deuce, the leader of Italy in 1925. But Mussolini was not that problematic as much as his counterpart will be in Germany. Now, when we talk about Germany, Germany was in a very bad shape. Weimar Republic was in Escrebo laws. Escrebo laws. Now, Germany was in a very bad shape because Germany had now something called the Weimar Republic in 300%. 300% they had inflation. And the problem was Germany had both a very strong right and a very strong left and a middle party. SPD, the Social Democratic Party, was the middle centralist. KPD, which is the Communist Party of Deutschland, which was on the pure extreme left. And we also have very fundamentalist parties on the right. What is interesting is that again Treaty of Versailles had humiliated the Germans beyond exception. Again, they had proportional representation, so they thought that democracy makes no sense because it is problematic. And both the left and the right tried to seize power, which is the Spartacus push. The left tried to capture power, the right stopped them. In the Kapp push, in which Hitler himself was there, the right tried to capture power, but the left stopped. And this is where Hitler will realize that he has to take a middle path, and he will establish what is called as the Nazi Party. Nazi Party means National Social Democratist Party or Nazi Party. And this party, with more and more Great Depression effects coming through, will become very, very popular. Rhetoric, which I will give full employment, national unity, the idea that the Jews were the problems because they had taken all economic power, the idea that the Treaty of Versailles should have been removed and should be removed. People were more happy to join the private army of the Nazi party, the SS, Sturm ab the Lum, rather than actually joining the army itself. The idea was that and Hitler was a charismatic leader, much like Mussolini, the fear of a communist revolution, and all of this will allow Hitler to capture power. How does he capture power? Quite interesting. He will be made chancellor through democratic process. Remember, fascists enter democracy to break democracy from within. He will become chancellor, which is prime minister. Then he had a president whose name is Hindenburg. President died. He said Hindenburg cannot be replaced. Dissolved the position of president. And then he himself asked his own SS, which is called Sturmstaffel, his secret, you can say, uh, his own personal guard, to burn the Reichstag, which is the parliament, and he blamed the parliament fire on Jews, on left, and he said that all Bolsheviks are Jews, all Jews are Bolsheviks, they are the enemies of the nation. So he will then proclaim himself as Führer in 1934 and the 1936 period. But now all our actors are in place and we can start the Second World War. See, Treaty of Versailles had done enough damage. Now we are discussing the reasons for the Second World War. So we are now in the Second World War. Treaty of Versailles has done enough for Italy and Germany to accept people like Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler, plus Great Depression, plus one thing which the the English and the French will do is they will follow what is called the policy of appeasement, as I will discuss policy of appeasement, which was there in Czechoslovakia, Austria, and Poland. And last but not the least is fragile democracies which existed all allowed Hitler to do what he did. Now, Hitler first started by taking the Austrian sector. That is called Anschluss. Now I'm starting the second World War for you. This is our last push, last 40, I think half an hour, and we'll be done. So this sector, he first takes Austria, Anschluss. Then he says that there are Germans who are being prosecuted in this sector, which is called as Czechoslovakia. And he will say that I want Lebensraum, Germans to come under their own wing, which is called as a roof for all the Germans together, living space. So, in the pretext of basically protecting the Germans in Czechoslovakia, he will enter Czechoslovakia and then go for a Munich conference where Britain, France, and Hitler and Mussolini will meet without the Czechoslovakians. And Czechoslovakia's Sudetenland area is first given to Hitler, and then he will take this whole sector. So this is called the policy of appeasement, that when Austria was taken and when Sudetenland was taken and when Czechoslovakia was taken, nobody said nothing because they thought that they were very, very harsh on the Germans. But then Hitler turned his attention towards the Polish sector. He will say that Danzig should be connected to Germany directly. And on 2nd September 1939, in the pretext of taking what is his, he will enter into the Polish sector and the Second World War will start, which is 1st September night he will enter. 2nd September he had basically started the First World War. Now, causes we already know: resentment with Treaty of Versailles, League of Nations had created a illusion of collective security, global economic crisis, and the policy of appeasement. Now, this war has a certain way of going ahead, but you have to understand 1939, there was only Germany, Italy versus Poland, Britain, and France. This is basically 1939. These are called Allied powers. These are called Axis powers. 1940, it will be Germany, Italy, Britain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Poland, and till Britain had no USA with it. 1941 is Germany, Italy, then Japan will enter on this side, Pearl Harbor, and 41 USA, Britain, France will be then there. And thereafter 43, 41 on this side, USSR will also enter when Operation Barbarossa will start. Now there are basically four phases in this war, and I want to discuss all the four phases with you. How? This is our last discussion. I hope everybody is with me till this point. This is the last discussion. Causes of the Second World War matter more rather than the course itself. Japan in the background had industrialized under the idea of not becoming, in a way, captured or becoming a part of an imperialistic notion. It had followed a model of sending its of children to overseas, learning engineering, reverse engineering, and Japan had industrialized in the period of 1910 and 1914. Now, 1939, let us first take into consideration what is going to happen. 1939, Germany attacks Poland. It takes Poland. It will now follow a new pattern which is called Blitzkrieg, quick warfare. It will use radio warfare, radio signals to communicate. The British and the French were thinking it is going to be trench warfare, but Hitler is going to use his panzer tanks, move very quickly in this sector, and Blitzkrieg had now hit Poland. Then Germany will move towards France, and when moving towards France, it will then take Netherlands and Belgium. And what is interesting is by June of 1940, by June of 1940, France, Netherlands, Belgium, France had surrendered in the same railway carriage in which the Germans had surrendered to the French in First World War. Then from July 1940, what we see is called the Battle of Britain. In the Battle of Britain, now Germany will turn its attention towards Britain. But the with Britain is problem with Britain that Britain is more than 4,000 kilometers or 2,000 kilometers away from Germany. Therefore, Germany can only hit the southern sector, not beyond it. Therefore, Germany will start to get bogged down in Battle of Britain. So in 1940-41 period, it will then turn towards Greece and Egypt. Now Hitler was getting frustrated and turning the axis towards the what is called as eastern sector. He will take Greece and Egypt, but he was still looking for oil. And the answer to that was in 1941, what is called as Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa is basically Hitler entering into Russia, USSR. Three-pronged attack was there. Ukraine he takes easily, but Stalingrad and Leningrad does not fall very quickly. He will start to again. Now, Blitzkrieg is not going to work in USSR. The cold is too much. War of attrition, long war. It is now war in which Russia is now going to just absorb. Stalin is going to absorb the Nazi power. In the background, Pearl Harbor will happen, where a Japanese is going to attack a certain ship, which was an American ship of the coast of Hawaii, and Hawaii was a American base. And in Pearl Harbor, the Japanese will now enter the war, and the US will be forced to enter the war because of Pearl Harbor. Once the US will enter the war, now the tide will turn. 1942, though the Japanese are running rampage, by 1942 mid war, the Battle of Midway Islands, then the Battle of Elamine, and then the Battle of what is called as 43. Operation Barbarossa was a failure. Battle of Stalingrad was now won by USSR. 1944, the Normandy, D-Day, and therefore, if you look at this whole structure, by this time, by May of 1945, Germany had surrendered, and by August of 1945, after two bombs were dropped on them, the Japanese also surrendered. The tide will turn here. Midway Islands, Elamine, and Battle of Stalingrad. And till this point, till Pearl Harbor, Hitler still had a chance. After Pearl Harbor, he had no chance. What is going to be the consequence of the Second World War is more important to us, because Second World War allowed for the decolonization of the world. Because India got independence, the British, the French had now become too weak. The atomic bomb had come into context. Now, nuclear power was available. Axis powers had lost because Hitler had too much to chew. And by 1945, he had no real powers in his own hand. This is the timeline of the Second World War. He will basically kill himself. But the point is, effects of war was death and destruction. Close to 8 crore people were now dead, and over and above that, European domination was ending. The world will now go into a bipolarity with USSR versus USA, and that is called the Cold War, a discussion to be have which we can have separately. This completes your world history. American Revolution, French Revolution, Russian Revolution, ideologies of Marxism, communism, and socialism. Your First World War is over. Interwar period is over. Second World War is over. Any question out of these areas, I hope you to answer. So I hope you are now all sorted, and this discussion is good enough for your understanding. Are we clear? Yes or no? This is where we will stop. If you want a session on Cold War politics, please you can comment it in the comment section. I'll be happy to take it. I plan to take post independence also one shot. If you want that, please comment that also. As of right now, your major themes which have been recurring in world history are over and are done. So thank you so much for being here. Decolonization and what is called as that word Cold War politics and decolonization happens together. That is for a discussion separately, because that you have to understand together, which is decolonization and Cold War. We can have a session specifically on that, right? So we'll do it, no issues whatsoever. For today, this was the agenda. I hope everything is sorted, right? Thank you. Take care. And if you want any other session for mains or for prelims from me, beginners or anything, just comment in the comment section. I'll be happy to do. Thank you. Take care and